This is recording 3 of the book The Resurrection of People and Eternal Life From Now On Is Our Reality by GRIGORI GRABOVOI. Read by Ludmila. November 2015. Introduction continued. Amazing things can be told about other organs as well. Just take the pituitary alone. In Chapter 4, we will talk about new medicine, the medicine of the future and already of the present. The cornerstone of this medicine is the practice of resurrection. The practice of resurrection is what determines the principles of the new medicine, and above all, the principle of full regeneration, recreation of matter. This new medicine has already set about fulfilling its primary task. This task is non-dying of the living. In one of the books of this series, we will also talk about numerology, a symbolic numeration. The fact is that this science can be used for the analysis of specific situations and for forecasting. For instance, when I, using clairvoyance, provide my opinion on an aircraft condition based on its tail number, I see that numbers are linked to specific malfunctions. That is why numerology allows for analysis of a situation. For someone who has no clear idea of what numerology is, it is hard to comprehend how common numbers he has known from school arithmetic can be connected to the events of real life. It is a mystery to him. He fails to see the connection. We will look into this connection and into how numerology can be used in everyday life. Another interesting subject is the life of animals and birds. Since childhood, we've been observing the birds flit from branch to branch, from tree to tree. We marvel at the ease and effortlessness with which they do it, or at the way they hover high in the sky. But the bird flight holds many surprises. Science, for example, does not yet know that birds' ability to fly is only partially attributed to flapping of wings. Anti-gravity created by them plays an essential role in their flight. Gravity in a pigeon's head, for example, is 10 times less than that on the tip of its tail, which means that the pigeon is able to distribute gravity and as a result can change its flight dynamics. Different types of birds have different ways of changing gravity and of its distribution throughout the body. And even the principle of flight may differ. For example, the principle of flight of the owl, a nocturnal bird, differs from that of daylight birds. The most interesting is the case of the eagle. It too has the ability to create anti-gravity, but in addition, it has the ability to dematerialize. If we watch an eagle making an attack, it looks like a small round flying ball. One might think it became so small because it had shrunk into itself so tightly. We, however, need to take into account that the eagle is capable of making its body size several times bigger or smaller, so it is not shrinkage, though shrinkage, of course, is present too. But most of that reduction of body size is due to dematerialization of some parts of its body. The eagle is also capable of changing its body shape depending on the challenge it faces. In terms of abilities, only the falcon can be partially compared to the eagle. The eagle possesses other amazing abilities as well, of which we will talk in another book. It is for a reason that primitive peoples worldwide used to associate the eagle with the Creator, and the fact that the eagle is portrayed on the coats of arms of a number of states is not fortuitous either. We can see the eagle on the coat of arms of Russia as well. In this case, it is a double-headed eagle. The eagle with 2 heads signifies a sustainable, prosperous future. In my ensuing books, we will also take a closer look at the phenomena such as levitation, materialization and dematerialization, telepathy, telekinesis, teleportation, etc. These phenomena remained a mystery for a long time. It's time to unravel it. The humanity has reached a qualitatively new stage of its development. On the agenda are non-dying of the living and resurrection of the gone, and it is no longer a question of theory, but of practice. Now it is finally a living reality, the living reality of true salvation of all. And please note that the facts of resurrection prove regenerability, recoverability of matter, which in its turn speaks of an expediency and the logic of any destruction. In our age of stockpiling of weapons of mass destruction, the practice of resurrection is a method of salvation. It shows an alternative path of development of civilization. Developing the mechanisms of regeneration, the mechanisms of restoration, of recovery, will be conducive to the attainment of the objectives of creation without destruction. The principles of restoration can be easily extended to all aspects of human activity. It can also be the basis for the development of creative thinking of the generations to come. Any so-called aggressive environment under this approach can be transformed, and after being transformed, can act as a non-aggressive element of primary, pristine environment. As a result, an effective behavior strategy can be determined, which would prevent an ecological disaster and ensure further development without environmental destruction. For it should be kept in mind that resurrection means control of the entire external space. Greater harmony with the environment can be achieved by creating, for example, wear-free materials or machines that, when in operation, won't require substantial additional resources. And this is all absolutely feasible, just as is the resurrection, and it is all in our hands. And we should always remember a simple truth. Man is born for joy, for happiness, and for living a productive and fulfilling infinite life. Chapter 1. Concrete Facts of the Resurrection of People. In this chapter, we will analyze some concrete facts of resurrection. All these facts have been documented. Actually, by now there are a large number of facts of resurrection, but out of the wealth of all available evidence, several facts representing different cases have been selected. The matter is that the requests for resurrection come to me sometimes immediately after the occurrence of biological death, and sometimes long after it happened. Therefore, the 4 cases analyzed below differ from one another in the amount of time that had passed after the occurrence of biological death before the resurrection took place. The facts presented below are as follows. Resurrection several hours after, case 4, several weeks after, case 3, several months after, case 1, and several years after, case 2, the occurrence of biological death. The cases 1 and 2 refer to the resurrection of men. The 2 other cases to the resurrection of women. 1. So, we now begin the analysis of the first case. The texts of the 2 statements cited here are taken from the book Grigori Grabovoi, The Practice of Control, The Way of Salvation, Volume 3, pages 756, 757, and 758-759. The books were published in Moscow by the Soprichastnost Publishing House in 1998. The statement of Emily Alexandrovna Rusanova, dated May 27, 1996. Quote, on September 25, 1995, during my personal meeting with Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi, I requested that he fully restore my son, A.E. Rusanov, to life. He was born on April 22, 1950, and passed away on June 16, 1995. My son was born in Moscow, and passed away also in Moscow. Prior to my meeting with Grigory Petrovich Grabovoi, I'd been in total despair, had a heart attack. After my visit to Grigori Petrovich Grabovoi, somewhere around early October 1995, I became hopeful that I would see my son again. I started feeling his spiritual presence in the house. I went to the cemetery, and upon approaching my son's grave, saw a deep crack going through the entire surface of the grave, with a small pit formed in the middle of it, as a result of some soil having been pushed out from the inside. Somewhere around midnight, I vividly saw with my eyes shut 2 white cords spanning from my chest over to my son's grave, to the pit in the middle, and then I sort of pulled these cords, experiencing heaviness as I pulled. It all lasted a few seconds. My son was buried in the Vostokovo cemetery in Moscow, but my vision of his grave was at the level of my apartment window, which is on the 7th floor. After I'd asked Grigori Petrovich Grabovoi to restore my son, A.E. Rusanov, to life, I shared this information with my son's former wife, Tatiana Ivanovna Kozlova, with whom, after their divorce, I kept a warm relationship. She, Tatiana Ivanovna Kozlova, attended my son's funeral. In the ensuing time, during our conversations that took place in the period from October to February, Tatiana Ivanovna Kozlova told me several times that she was repeatedly encountering people in the streets of Kaliningrad and Moscow who resembled my son, A.E. Rusanov. In early February of 1996, she was traveling by Yantar train from Moscow to Kaliningrad Baltic, and she happened to share a compartment with a man who bore a strong resemblance to my son, A.E. Rusanov. Similar in appearance, with similar manners, behavior, gestures, gaze, but looking somewhat detached, lost, he was traveling with a man who seemed to be supervising, handling him, but who, however, never called him by name. Tatiana Ivanovna Kozlova was surprised when my son, A.E. Rusanov, on seeing the money, a new 1,000 ruble banknote, showed apparent ignorance of this money. Unquote. The statement of Tatiana Ivanovna Kozlova of May 27, 1996. Grigori Grabovoi, The Practice of Control, The Way of Salvation, page 758. Quote, I was married to A.E. Rusanov from December 1975 till October 1982. After the dissolution of my marriage with A.E. Rusanov, I remained friends with his mother, Emily Alexandrovna Rusanova, born June 20, 1927 in Moscow region. During our meeting on September 26, 1995, she told me that she had asked Grigori Petrovich Grabovoi to restore her son, A.E. Rusanov, born August 22, 1950 in Moscow, to life. According to his death certificate, A.E. Rusanov passed away June 16, 1995 in Moscow. After that, knowing that Grigori Petrovich Grabovoi was working on bringing A.E. Rusanov back to life, I, during the period from October 1995 to February 1996, started seeing people in the streets resembling A.E. Rusanov in appearance, and during my travel to Kaliningrad region, I happened to share a compartment with a man who looked, I thought, as if he'd been brought back from the other side. This man in the compartment matched A.E. Rusanov, born in 1950, on the following criteria: hair color, eye color, outward appearance, and the oval of the face. The man's demeanor matched exactly the one of A.E. Rusanov, as did his personality traits. He had the same habits, taciturnity, predilection for reading. Most of the time he was reading a newspaper. The man accompanying him was of average height, who during the entire travel never called him by name. And when that man showed money, the person matching Rusanov, on seeing a new 1,000 ruble banknote, looked surprised, and the man accompanying him explained that that was the new currency. I had the impression that he, the one being accompanied by the man, had been cut off from real life for some time, though he very likely retained his professional skills, as the man accompanying him said they moved vehicles. The foregoing encounter happened on February 2nd, 1996, during my trip from Moscow to Kaliningrad by Yan-Tar train." Unquote. Such is the description of this case as presented by the direct participants of the events. These descriptions reflect a number of important points, which we will examine in more detail. We begin the analysis with the statement of Emily Alexandrovna, the mother of the gone. Almost at the very beginning of her statement, Emily Alexandrovna says that after I had begun my work on restoring her son to life, she started to feel his spiritual presence in the house. The matter is that even when biological death occurs, and a person goes through a burial phase and occupies a certain grave, his consciousness still retains all the knowledge previously acquired, and this consciousness is aware of its connection with the body, in which by now there is no life, or rather what is commonly called life. And thereby, the body, even without any life processes in it, in our case the son's body, when the mother's consciousness focuses on it, reacts adequately to the touch of external consciousness, to the information contained in the impetus of external consciousness, and therefore accordingly gives an adequate response. This shows that by visualizing a body, it is possible to convey the knowledge of resurrection to its soul. Later on, after the resurrection had taken place, when the resurrected was questioned, it emerged that when external consciousness was focusing on him, he was aware of it and was associating his physical body with his own self, although this physical body was in the grave and was naturally limited in its possibilities in many ways. What is more, the return says, and this is a known fact, that his presence at the unified information level indicated that his physical body continued to exist and had all and any qualities required to continue to be part of the entire socium, part of the society. And importantly, this knowledge included both the previous information associated with the former functions of this physical body and the new information associated with his biological death. We now continue reading the statement. When Emily Alexandrovna came to the cemetery and approached her son's grave, she saw, quote, a deep crack going through the surface of the grave, with a small pit formed in the middle of it as a result of some soil having been pushed out from the inside, unquote. The explanation of this is as follows. This pushed out soil should be construed as primary materialization of consciousness, of that consciousness that was in the physical body. After I had begun my work on the resurrection, primary materialization of this consciousness into a spherical shape took place, followed by its entering the information carcass of the planet. After that begins the stage of creating a material structure around the soul, the structure that we usually see when looking at people. We can say that both theoretically and practically, man can be regarded as a structure of consciousness in a given physical shell. I will make a comment here. I have mentioned the primary materialization of consciousness into a spherical shape. Well, after passing the information carcass of the planet, this sphere can be projected either into another fetus, resulting in the birth of a child, or it can be projected into the structure of resurrection. In our case, due to control, the projection into the structure of resurrection was carried out. In other words, the same body was recreated, the same person. So here the same was done, what Jesus Christ had done by resurrecting Lazarus. But only in this case, it was several months instead of several days that passed after biological death. Emily Alexandrovna further writes that one day around midnight she vividly saw with her eyes shut 2 white cords spanning from her chest to her son's grave, to the small pit formed in it. Then she sort of pulled these cords, experiencing heaviness as she pulled, and it all lasted a few seconds. From further description it follows that Rusanova's son was buried in the Vostryakovo cemetery in Moscow, but her vision of his grave was at the level of her apartment window, which was on the 7th floor. The 2 cords described above mark a transitional phase. The first cord appeared when the mother gave birth to the child. It is her son's birth structure. The second cord is a structure of possible prolongation, of extension, of continuation of his consciousness, or of his essence. As I said above, after a person's biological death, there are 2 possible alternatives: either a birth as a different child, and therefore reincarnation, or resurrection, and therefore recreation of the same body, and not only recreation of the former matter, but of any consciousness structures as well. In this case, due to external control, the variant of resurrection was being carried out. The appearance of the 2 connecting cords and perception of the son's grave and the apartment located on the 7th floor on the same level signifies that the son's structure of consciousness and that of external environment tied together. In the practice of resurrection, there is a rather singular aspect, namely, a body is drawn to, is tied to the structure, to the location where the body happens to be after its biological death. It means that the place where the body is laid becomes the place to which it is drawn to, tied to. The primary tie is within a radius of about 2 meters from the physical body. The entire tie area exists approximately within a 50-meter radius from the grave, and beyond that is the entry into the information carcass of the outside world. Knowing about the tie and about tie-related aspects is important for the resurrection procedure, as the reverse transition through biological death implies in actual fact the transition through the tie structure as well, and the one being resurrected naturally should seek to leave this tie. Incidentally, if we construe the vision described by Emily Alexandrovna from this perspective, then it can be said that the configuration of the grave that she saw is a tie variation of a biological body to a fixed place. The text of Emily Alexandrovna Rusanova's statement is further based on the information she received from Tatiana Ivanovna Kozlova, so we can use both descriptions of the events that followed. We learn from the text that after Emily Alexandrovna had requested that I resurrect her son and shared this information with her son's former wife Kozlova, Kozlova started encountering people in the streets of Kaliningrad and Moscow who resembled her former husband A.E. Rusanov, and when traveling from Moscow to Kaliningrad by Yantar train, she encountered a man who had all the characteristics of Rusanov near to her, this time right in her compartment. If you read Kozlova's description of this encounter, you might get the impression that her behavior was too passive. But imagine that it is you who are on a train, and in the compartment of the carriage you suddenly see a man who resembles your relative whom you buried a few months ago, like 2 drops of water. What is more, this man pays no attention to you. Do you think you would come up to him and say, "Hello, don't you recognize me?" Or rather, maybe, you would be stupefied, speechless, unable to make a single step, because your legs would suddenly go rubbery. And though Tatiana Ivanovna does not elaborate on how she felt during the encounter, one can imagine what a whirlwind of different emotions overcame her: astonishment and confusion and bewilderment, and a sudden realization of the fact that resurrection had really happened, against all odds. Against all odds, because at present resurrection is still perceived by many as a miracle, because for the time being there are people who do not have genuine understanding of the fact that in actuality resurrection is a standard procedure, and that soon resurrection will be regarded as a matter of course. It will become a norm of life. But as of yet, a person who all of a sudden sees a buried relative near to him in the train compartment can't arrive at any conclusion, for he is either unable to accept a possible miracle right away, or fears that he might do something wrong. So when reading the statement, account should be taken of a person's state in that situation. This book puts you on the path towards realization of true reality, leads to understanding of how to behave in such circumstances. On the very first encounter with the resurrected, of prime importance is to start a conversation with him or her, and to offer help. We now return to Rusanova's narrative, to the passage where she says that at first Kozlova started encountering people resembling Rusanov out in the streets, and then, during her trip from Moscow to Kaliningrad, she encountered a man who had all the characteristics of Rusanov near to her, this time right in her compartment. In connection with this narrative, it should be noted that the gone, or in this case it is better to say the returning, are sensitively attuned to the state of the people to whom they are returning, and could never cause them unnecessary distress. That is why at first Rusanov would appear some distance away from his former wife, gradually leading her up to accept the possibility of his return, given that Kozlova already knew that the process of the resurrection was underway. So when she writes that she was seeing people who looked like her former husband, she in reality was seeing already resurrected Rusanov. It needs to be explained that the reason the resurrected are so considerate and understanding is that the elements of resurrection have been conveyed to their consciousness. And due to the fact that these elements have been transmitted to them, they now have a different psychic structure of perception of reality. They, for example, believe, and their personal experience corroborates that belief, that life is eternal. They also develop a particular attitude towards the laws of macrocosm. They find many of the laws to be absolutely true, and they never overstep them. They also know about the existence of a 50-meter tie, and on their return to the physical level, they stay for some time within these 50 meters, away from the people to whom they are returning. End of recording 3.